My name is Carol McCoy. Today is November 19th, 2013, and I am in Nashville, Tennessee. It's my pleasure today to interview Chancellor Tom Gray of Gallatin. This interview is taking place as part of the Legal History Project of the Fellows of the Tennessee Bar Foundation. Chancellor Gray, better known to your friends as Tom Gray, please tell me about your birth and where you were born.
I was born in Bedford County, Tennessee. The county seat is Shelbyville, and that was January the 19th, 1942. My father was George Thomas Gray, and my mother was Adele Tenney Jordan Gray. And I had three brothers and one sister. My brothers usually said something to the effect that who they were. For example, Willis, my oldest brother, I'm Willis Gray, and I have three brothers, and each one has a sister. So, but that was just, I guess, humorous kinds of things, and you'd probably heard that someplace other. But I do have three brothers, one sister, and I think that's really about all for.
What did your dad do?
My father, Willis, had always told me my father was an entrepreneur. I think he did. He had some businesses. He had a cafe on the square in Shelbyville. It was actually not on the square, but one store next. It was Jack's Cafe. He also had a cab stand, and there was also, at times, some farming, and especially had some horses. So he always had some Tennessee walking horses, not a trainer, but just as a good horse for children. And so with four boys, and we would get that colt, and they were not afraid of us, and we weren't afraid of them, and they made good walking horses and good horses for sale. So every year at the horse show, he would have a colt for sale, and that's the celebration in
the walking
the
horse?
Walking horse celebration, right. It started, I think, in 1939.
How old were you when you learned to ride?
To learn to ride a horse?
Yes.
Well, I had a pony, brown and white, brown spots and white body, and I was probably less than, I know I was less than 6. I was probably around 5 years old, and my oldest brother had a horse that he rode, and my father or grandfather would saddle the pony for me. I would get on the pony, and the pony would go into the chicken house or a barn if the door was left open on the barn. But that pony managed to do his will, not mine. And so I guess that's pretty young to ride a horse, but I couldn't control them until a few years later.
Do you still ride?
No, I don't.
In the birth order, are you the middle child?
I'm the middle child.
And how did that work out in your family, being in the middle?
I don't know. I've thought about that a lot. There's certainly some things that work. I guess one of the situations that came up, I remember my brother, who was going to be 12 years old, oldest brother was going to be 12 years old, and he was asking Mother and Daddy for a gun for Christmas, and he specifically wanted a shotgun, and so he would ask and talk. And when it came along that I turned 12, I said I want a .22 rifle, and I didn't have to ask anymore. You did it for Willis, and so I got the .22 rifle. And same way with driving an automobile. He went through difficult times just begging for driver's license and being told no. And when he got old enough, and he would ask for a driver's license, and he could drive anything because he'd driven farm equipment, and but he got his license, and then when I came along, my mother and father were so used to having an extra driver, there wasn't any question. I just went up and got my driver's license. So I think somebody else headed things off, but that's just examples of what happens when you're in the middle.
Now, you were born after your sister, right?
That's right.
So she was the big sister?
She was big sister. And
did she have a special bond with you because of that?
I think so. I think it is. I know, can't think really of things that were done, perhaps, except in 4-H club. And she was interested. She was a member of 4-H club. She wanted me to become a member of 4-H club when I got to the grade level where they allowed you to be a member of the 4-H club. And she would compete in various things, and I would too. Like the 4-H club would have speaking contests. They also had the bacon biscuit contest, which Barbara June, my sister, won it all the time. My brother, oldest brother, one time, he couldn't figure out why he didn't get a ribbon, because he had picked up the leftover dough and formed it right, rolled it out, and submitted that as cookies from her.
Did you get any ribbons?
I did. Never first place. It was I got a second place one year, and don't think I
For what?
made it in biscuit, and I can't remember. I probably had a second place in speech.
And how many years did you do 4-H?
Well, we started I started, I think, in the 4th grade.
Wow.
And so I went through the 8th grade, 4 years.
And your mother, where was she from?
My mother was reared in Bedford County, although my maternal grandfather and grandmother were from Coffee County, and but they got married, and then I think they moved to Bedford County, where he worked. I've forgotten how many. Mother had. She was the youngest child in her family. And I don't remember all my uncles. Could be.
With 5 children, I would think she had her hands full, but did she help with teaching each of you to read or with your studies?
I don't recall that much of help with studies unless we had a question, but education was a big priority with both parents, and they wanted us to do in school the best we could, and I guess they started talking about college when I was in 2nd or 3rd grade.
Did your parents go to college?
No. My mother was a high school graduate, my father wasn't.
So when you were talking about being in the middle, was it important that Willis, your oldest brother, go to college?
No, he when he finished high school, graduated high school, he joined the United States Army and did a career in the Army. He and a friend of his, Bobby Chambers, who was the son of an optometrist, had slipped away from high school one day, and they drove over to to Fayetteville, and tried to join the Army. So Mother and Daddy, they got a call somehow from the school that they were skipping school, and so they began to look, and some friends said, well, they've gone to Fayetteville, and so they drove quickly to Fayetteville to say, you know, he's not 18, and back then emancipation was age 21, and but they kept him from getting in the Army.
And this would have been in the early 50s?
Yes, yes.
Was he hoping to go to Korea?
No, well, Dr. Chambers had told his son and Willis, and they just listened to everything he said about being in the service and how he had parachuted behind the enemy lines. So they were looking for some of that same excitement, I think.
Well, you had a lawyer, friend of your father's. Is that the first lawyer that you knew?
That was James Bulmer, and he was a wonderful gentleman, and in politics, and I think he was Speaker of the House for the state of Tennessee. But he was, my father liked to know what was going on in the county, and he liked going into the courtroom and liked talking to people after being in court. And so he had several friends who were attorneys, Gerald Grizzell and Ty Cobb. You probably remember the name Ty Cobb because he was chancellor in that judicial district when I became a chancellor.
And what stories did he tell about the courts or the legislature that were of interest to you when you were at the dinner table or
right, at the supper table? We had breakfast, dinner, and supper was what we had. It was that way, but at the supper table, we were all supposed to be at the supper table, and Daddy would bring home stories about, most of the time it was about bootlegging, because, and he told us that if you're going to do something illegal with alcohol, don't make it, just sell it. And said, this is, and we had the bootleggers, so even though we were a dry county, we had several bootleggers, and if they didn't support the right sheriff, then they may not be bootlegging again.
Who was the sheriff?
I don't remember who the sheriff was, but.
Well, tell me about going to school those first few years. You had, I know, one teacher, fourth grade teacher that you really liked.
Yes, that's right. Her name was Lindsay Hall, Mrs. Lindsay Hall. And she also encouraged me to join the 4-H club. And in addition, she, I don't know whether I was in the first, second, third grade, I always found myself at the back of the back of the room, not the courtroom, but back of the room. And some child had come into fourth grade, and then I think they decided he was in the wrong school, so he moved he transferred to another school, and there was a chair on the front, and Miss Hall asked me, or it was an invitation to come up and take that chair. It wasn't come up here where you can hear better, or so she was just a wonderful teacher.
And who were some of your friends in grade school?
Well, I had a friend, Kenneth Couser. I had a cousin, Terry Gray. We were just slightly, I was slightly younger than he was. He was born on December the 25th of a year. It would have been December 25th, 1941, and I was born January the 19th, 1942. So we only had a few weeks of not being the same age, and so we were in the same class at times.
How big was the school that you went to as elementary school?
Well, it was. I'm not sure how many students they had, but it was called the Shelbyville Mill School, and this was a school where there had been, I guess it was Uniroyal, but U.S. Royal, whatever, and they had housing that they provided, and you could rent from the employer. And then we had buses. We didn't live there, but the school, there was no kindergarten, but it was 1 through 8. And I would imagine there were probably a couple hundred students.
At that time, did you think that Shelbyville was a big city or a small city?
I think probably I didn't recognize it as a big city. Nashville would be a big city. Memphis would be a big city. Chattanooga would be. But Shelbyville, I don't think would classify as a big city. Then I also, and then again, this is when my oldest brother was involved. He had a job, and he graduated from high school, and he was going off to the Army, and he had a job after school, and so he said, you just come up there and talk to Mr. Farrah and see if you can get my job, because he's got a lot of people. So I did, and he hired me, and so I would work after school.
What was the job?
Whatever he indicated, but mostly it was like cleaning up, washing the windows, taking out the trash, and picking up. I wasn't doing anything about customers coming in. I could tell them where things were, but I didn't.
And what type of a store was it?
Fabric.
Fabric
It was
store?
a fabric store.
So you made biscuits and worked in a fabric store?
I did. I worked in a fabric store. Came to know a little bit about it, but not much.
Do you still make biscuits?
No, I don't. I don't think I've ever, trying to remember, I haven't made any from scratch in a long, long time.
You left 4-H and left the biscuits behind?
I think that's exactly what I did. Yeah.
Tell me, as you went through high school, what interested you as far as the classes that you took and the teachers that you had?
Well, I think I had some really good teachers, and I did make a mistake in one situation. It was not anything big, but over the years, it's come to me that and after it was the school and some teachers, they decided to set up, I suppose, a stronger class in mathematics, and they picked the students for that class. And I thought, and I was picked to be in that class, and I went into the class one day, and then I was trying to decide, and I said, well, I know I can make A's over in world history, but I'm not sure I can make A's in math. So I went over to the world history class, and I've always thought that was a mistake. I should have gone into that math class. Not that I had any abilities there, but they were good teachers to try to see about accelerated classes. And
what kind of chores did you have when you were in high school, and what type of after-school activities did you have?
well, the after-school activity was I would go downtown and work in the fabric store until 5 or 5:30, whichever hour he closed up. And I worked in there Monday, Tuesday. Wednesday was a closed day. The stores closed on Wednesday. All around the square closed on Wednesday. So I didn't work on Wednesday. Thursday and Friday, and then all day Saturday. And so that was after school activities. I did have other activities, and I was interested in drama. And one of my teachers, I think Ruby Wallace, said I should try out for a part in a play that the school was doing, the director of drama. And so then I got a interesting part. It was just a bit part, but I played the father of a young lady, and I forget more about that. I don't remember a lot about the play because another student, Ed Craighead, had talked to this drama teacher, and Ed had a bigger part in the play that I was in, and Ed wanted to do a play for state competition, and the teacher wanted to do that, and so they needed, and the play only had 2 persons in it, and they were one was a rebel soldier in the Civil War, and the other was a Union soldier, and they had a skirmish, and these 2 soldiers, there were other soldiers that didn't make a big issue about being deceased, but there were some bodies lying around, and then one of them, I forget which one, was thirsty, and I think it was the Civil War. Ed was he was a rebel, and but he hollers over, "Hey Yank, you got any water?" And so then I'd make a response, but it was a whole play about getting these personalities. We went to competition at Middle Tennessee State College for Teachers, which is what it was known as, Middle Tennessee State University. We went to the competition over there, and we won first place there. And then we went to Knoxville for the state, again, the whole state, and they had come schools to do it.
What year were you in school when you did that?
When I did that, that would have been in 1958, I think, 1958.
And you must have been rich if you were working all those hours after school. What did you use your money for?
I don't remember that. I don't remember being rich. I don't.
Well, except for Wednesday when they closed the stores, you were working quite a bit. Why did they close on Wednesdays?
That was just the decision of the merchants, and that they would close on Wednesday. It wasn't unusual in these small towns to close on Wednesday
Is it because they went to
afternoon.
church on Wednesday night?
I would imagine that was part of the reasoning for doing that.
But you're a Methodist.
Well, I am a Methodist. I was just starting to say I didn't join the Methodist Church, though, until I probably was 22 or 23.
So did your parents take you to church on Wednesday nights?
No, we didn't go to church on Wednesday night.
As you went through the last few years of high school, you had to make a decision about whether to go to college or not. What factored into whether or not you went to college?
Well, I think if me personally, I never thought about not going. It was going. As a matter of fact, and I wanted to be an attorney, and I heard a lot of discussions about the Cumberland Law School from my father, and he was very much liked Cordell Hull, and I think Cordell Hull went to Cumberland University, Cumberland Law School, and I had it all figured out. Probably started looking at this when I was in the 8th grade. I knew I was going to go to college, and I knew I was going to be a lawyer, and I figured, and I had to figure out how to pay for it.
Which was?
Join the Army and get eligible for GI Bill benefits, and then, so if I did that right after, I probably would only have been in 3 or 4 years. But what happened was that sometime in the 50s, the federal government cut out the GI Bill. So that I had to think about other things, and I just remembered now where the money went that I had earned in high school. It was to pay my tuition at Martin College.
How did you pick Martin?
A friend of mine, Jerry Looney, and I ran around a lot together. He was a Methodist. His mother and father were Methodist. Mr. Looney was the ag teacher at the high school. Ms. Looney was a grade school teacher, and they had told Jerry that he probably would not do well if he didn't mature a little bit more. And so they suggested, and Jerry was going to go to Martin College. I'd never heard of Martin College. He was going, he asked me, why don't I go with him? I said, well, you know, I can do that. It's a 2-year college. I can go 2 years there, and then I can get another year in. And at that time, you could go to law school after 3 years of college. You didn't have to have the baccalaureate degree like you do now. And so I was, and then I talked to a friend of mine who was Kenneth Pinkston. He and I were in the same class, and Kenneth was going to college, and we also had a mutual friend, E.J. Smith, Estill Smith, and Estill was going to college, and they both were thinking about Murfreesboro, and so I said that Jerry Looney was going to Martin, and I think I'm going to go to Martin too. So Kenneth said something to his minister, and the minister said, I'm going to take you guys down there. So Kenneth, E.J., and I went with him one Sunday afternoon down to Pulaski, and we made a decision to go to Martin College. And I had, at that point, was with the 2 years, and had 2 years of college, and then one of my Miss Butler taught English at Martin, and that was back in the days when everybody, all the universities apparently took up English writing, composition writing, and so forth. And so she comes in one day, and she had never been married. So I say that because she'd always devoted her life to teaching, and she said to me, "There's some people here from Peabody College in Nashville, and they've got a special program, and I think you should go talk to them." So I went and talked to them, and they were professors at Peabody College, and they had received a grant from the Ford Foundation for a program called Study Teach, and it carried some benefits of scholarships to Peabody, and so I decided to go to Peabody and get a baccalaureate degree, and then to I had to make a commitment in order to be in part of that Study Teach program, would be that during the course of the 2 years that I was going to be in the program, we would visit 5 school systems. One of them was Hamilton County, Chattanooga. Another one was in Indianapolis, Indiana, I think. Another one was in Missouri. And we would go and spend a week at those schools and if they had a Board of Education meeting, we'd go to the Board of Education meeting. And so I applied for that program, got accepted to it, and then still my thought was, well, I can teach, and then I'll have a college degree, and then I can apply for law school. So I kept moving that.
Let me back up just a moment. You went to Columbia Central High School in Shelbyville?
No, it was Central High School in Shelbyville, not Columbia.
Okay. Central High School. And then you went to Martin for 2 years.
Yes.
And got your associate's degree. Did you commute, or did you?
Oh no, we stayed in the dormitory, and
was that the first time you were away from home?
yes, I had
And
not
how
been.
far was it?
Oh, it's about an hour or less driving. About an hour's drive. I forgot how many miles it was.
Did you work while you were in college at Martin?
No, I didn't. I didn't work at Martin. That's where my money went, was there, but I didn't work.
And what
at
was your
Martin.
major?
English.
English there, and then after 2 years you transferred to Peabody in the program that you just told us about.
That's right.
And was your major at Peabody English?
Yes, it was.
And after you finished your bachelor's, is it correct that you became the dean of students at Martin?
Yes. I had, when I finished the Study Teach program, also signed up to go to graduate school. So I got a Bachelor of Arts, and I think it was a Master of Science. And I did go, I taught in Chattanooga, and I was married, and we were looking at going to law school. Then the opportunity came to go to Martin College in Pulaski. It was the Office of Admission Dean, be the director. I didn't go as a dean. It was Director of Admissions, and that would have been in '65, I think, 1965. And Dr. Westenberger was the president of the college, and he offered me the director of admissions position, in which also was a recruiting office too, that we would, the Office of Admission would visit all the high schools in Middle Tennessee and encourage students and try to recruit students to come to the college. So I did that, and then at some point I was Dean of Student Services for a few years. I think I spent 9 years at Martin, not counting.
You finished your bachelor's at Peabody and taught a year in Chattanooga.
Yes, and then went back to Pulaski.
Then went back to Pulaski, but you were also getting your master's.
I think I only lacked a summer. I was on finishing up the master's. It may have been 2 summers, but
You must have been driving quite a bit.
We did.
One's in Nashville and one's in Pulaski. That's 2.5, 3 hours apart.
I don't remember. I just remember I could do that, and I don't remember how far apart they were.
Now, did you and your wife live in Chattanooga when you were teaching?
Yes.
And was she a teacher too?
No, she didn't think that she could handle teaching, which she was wrong, because after the birth of our second child, Christy then just went and became a teacher. She became an elementary teacher, teacher of kindergarten, which she loved that job.
You mentioned that you had a few years at Martin College, and this is not UT Martin. I imagine there's a lot of confusion that arises because of that.
There was confusion, yes.
But you were the Director of Admissions and Dean of Students for a while?
I was Director of Admissions and then Dean of Student Services, and then I guess Dean of Administration.
And you became President?
I did.
That's a pretty amazing career in a short period of time.
I don't know about that. I was anxious to get on to go to law school, and I was looking at making an application to the University of Tennessee. This was when I was president of the college, that I was looking at going to law school, and because I had to make a choice, if I were going to stay in higher education, I needed to get a doctorate degree, and I preferred if I was to get a law degree. So I had some conversations with people on the administrative staff and Dr. Andy Holt of the university, and I needed to have a job, and a job that would allow me to go to school if I were law school if I were accepted. And so they had things in student services and with head resident of a dormitory, in which they had a nice apartment where, and at that time too, we had a son. Sean was born in 1967, so we were looking toward that, and that's when the Board of Trustees asked me to, offered to me the role of president. I kind of skipped over because I was talking about making that decision, and so I decided I would accept the presidency of Martin, and so that's what I did. And then 3 years later, I was evaluating whether to stay in higher education, and one of the professors at Peabody was female, and she was talking to me about coming in and getting the doctorate degree and how many doors it would open. And then I still wanted law school, and I talked to Hal Raymer, who was president of Volunteer State Community College, and he was very kind, and he gave me a job there, and at the college, with the understanding I was going to go to the Nashville School of Law if I got admitted.
So you were the dean of students at Volunteer State?
Yes.
And you had a little family at that time.
I did.
And your wife at that time started teaching elementary school?
She started after my daughter had finished first grade.
Now your daughter, Shannon?
Shannon.
Was born in 71.
July 71. July 11, 71.
Then your wife, I think it's Christine?
Her name was Christy, yes. Christy. She was from Nashville.
How did you all meet?
We met at Martin College.
Okay.
Someone had told me, well, I had worked, when I was working on the, in the fabric store in Shelbyville, and I would be talking about going off to college, and someone came and said, heard me talking about that, and they said, well, they had the cutest girl on the 5 o'clock hop. So Christy had she had a job in the last year of her high school, maybe for 2 years of the 5 o'clock hop. I don't know whether anybody remembers that, but it came on at 5 o'clock.
That 5 o'clock college?
5 o'clock hop. It was.
5 o'clock hop. Yes.
You remember it?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it was getting high school students to come up and dance on Channel 4 for 30 minutes, I guess. And she and I don't know. She knew Ray Cooper. Ray was in high school. Ray is Mary Cooper's son, and so she would invite him a lot, and then they would get people to come. The two of them would get people to come and dance on TV, and then they cut it out after when she went to Martin, not because she went to Martin or not because they couldn't find somebody else, but I think there were some matters where some people didn't approve of dancing.
Now, you must be a pretty good dancer.
Who?
You.
No, I'm not. I can't dance. I can't.
What a
dance.
shame.
Can't do it.
So, you met at Martin.
We met, yes.
And her last name was?
Christy Link, L-I-N-K.
Was she related to any of the lawyers that are in Nashville, Link?
No,
Oh.
she wasn't.
But let's go back to when you were president at Martin. I understand there was a time when you you've already mentioned Mary Cooper, had a son who really didn't want to go to school, but you interviewed him or talked to him, and she said after that he changed his mind and decided to go to college. What did you tell that young man?
I think what I told him was that he probably first would have a good time at Martin. It was a small school. You'll get to know everybody on campus, and there are a lot of activities, but the major thing is that if you go ahead and get some higher education, you're going to be in jobs that, and there are going to be jobs out there that demand a college degree before you get hired. So I said it opens up a lot of doors for you, and I think you ought to give it a chance. And he did. He spent 2 years there. I think I was gone his second year. I think I had resigned at Martin.
When you were Dean of Students at Volunteer State, you were also working on your plan to become a lawyer?
When I went to see Dr. Hal Raymer, that was exactly right, because I wanted him to know that I wanted to go to the night law school. And he agreed that if I could handle the workload, that would be fine. That would be my own time.
Where was the law school that you went to?
Nashville School of Law, and it was at the YMCA.
In Nashville?
In Nashville.
At that time, was it located in downtown Nashville or outside of Nashville?
I would say it was downtown Nashville. There was the YMCA, and I used to know the history a little bit better, but the Supreme Court had approved for that to be a recognized law school by the Supreme Court of Tennessee. And they just met. They had class at the Y. That was something. The new building went up before I got there, but they had in Nashville there was. You remember where they used to have the older building for University of Tennessee night classes. It wasn't too far from there.
How old were you when you started law school?
I think I was probably 31.
But you spent a great deal of your years after high school in school, except for the year that you taught at
Chattanooga.
Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Yes.
So you had 10, 15 years of teaching while you're working on your plan to go to law school. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, I had at least 9 there in Chattanooga. It was just, I think, something that I wanted to do. I wanted to be a lawyer, and I wanted to do the things that and be like James Bulmer, because my father had him placed up on a pedestal, and he talked about what a good person he was. And then there was another lawyer who he and his wife lived up the road more into Rich Valley, I think is the name, Gerald Grizzell. And I think one time he had a farm, and I'm trying to remember what we did once for Mr. Grizzell. I think we were moving some animals, and we had to come out on the highway, and we needed to make sure that the animals stayed together, because we were just changing them to another lot where the grass was growing better.
When you were at Volunteer State, Dean of Students, things were happening in society. I think this might have been in the late 60s, 70s. It was actually in the 70s, I think, when you were at Volunteer State, correct?
I went there in July of 1974.
So the years that you spent at Martin, being the Dean of Students and the President of the university, how did you deal with some of the social issues that were coming up at that time? In the late 60s
there
or early
were
70s?
social issues about discrimination that we had to deal with. At Martin, that had pretty much been determined by the Tennessee Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church, and that Methodist churches would be open to persons who were black, and Martin College had a basketball team, and in Pulaski there was a young man who was a good player, and the coach wanted this young man to play, and that was fine. We opened the door to black basketball player, and he was from Pulaski, and people come out and they liked to see him. And now when we went away, we had to take some special precautions at times, and had to deal with the restaurant where we were going to have a meal or meals. Had to deal with, I remember one school, and I'm not going to name the school, it's in another state, but pretty close to driving, absolutely refused to let us, to play us or let us play because we had a black player on the team. But that was, for a few years, an issue. Athletics was an issue about black players. But Martin College always, from the time that I was referring to, which was probably 65, maybe 66, that, and then women's rights and was another issue that I guess colleges and universities probably were making decisions, and I'm sure the Nashville School of Law too, because and you know, I think, Carol, you can help me. Wasn't Irvin Gilcrease, didn't he get denied about 3 times?
He did get denied 3 times to the Nashville School of Law. The 3rd time, I think, was in 1967. That was the 3rd time he applied. That's when he got accepted. And I think that's when some of the advances started. But I also wanted to ask you, you are working as the Dean of Students from 64 to about 70 at Martin, and then you became the president 70 through 74. Vietnam War is going on during this time, and young men are being drafted. Some schools are having a lot of unrest. What happened at Martin, and how did you handle it?
We didn't have a strong unrest. We had, I remember one time when a couple of the professors and getting students, they marched from the college to downtown Pulaski, or to the courthouse in opposition to the Vietnam War. That was fine. We didn't find that we had to do anything relative to that. That was an expression of support for getting out of the Vietnam War. And so we did have, and they put the GI Bill back into effect, I think, shortly after the Vietnam War, or Vietnam.
Martin College is based in Pulaski, and you were there during what the nation considered a turbulent time. Pulaski was also the home of the Ku Klux Klan. How many African American students did you have, and how did the Klan relate to that?
Well, we never had any problems with the persons of Ku Klux Klan. They wanted to have a march, and people came from out of state. They also came from other towns. And
The Klan?
I'm sorry?
The Klan wanted to have a march?
Yes, in Pulaski, and they met requirements and had And they did draw people together who marched against or in favor of discrimination.
Now, Martin College is pretty famous, is it not, for some of its graduates? I think Ross Bass, a former state U.S. Senator.
U.S. Senator. Yes. I'm trying to remember other persons.
Well, locally, wasn't Mrs. Grisham of Grisham's Salads
on the board?
On the board.
She was on the board.
And Robert Curry, who was a big presence in Pulaski.
Robert E. Curry was on the board.
Did you know Mr. Curry?
I did.
Did you know Mr. Parmenas Cox?
I did. And you know J.B.
I know
Cox,
J.B. Cox, Chancellor.
Chancellor J.B. Cox, the grandson of Parmenas.
Right. Parmenas is the father of my best friend Lydia.
Oh, okay.
So I know a little bit about Pulaski and the downtown part of it, but I didn't know the history of Martin College.
Well, let me say about the Ku Klux Klan, there were a lot of organizations at the time the Klan was, I guess, decided upon, and they had gone under different names. And from my understanding, as far as Pulaski being the home of the Ku Klux Klan, it was just sort of a joke, the KKK, but somehow it had a ring and was picked up and used. But then the Ku Klux Klan does say that Pulaski is the birth of the Ku Klux Klan.
How big is Martin as a college right now?
It's about 1,200 students, and it's also a four-year college.
Have you remained an active alumni of the school?
I'm not as active as I probably would be or should be.
Are you an active alumni of Volunteer State?
More so than with Martin. I'm on the foundation board at Volunteer State Community College.
Are you still an adjunct professor there?
No, I haven't taught a class there in quite a while.
But you did teach.
I did, even after I became judge. I think I taught some.
What did you teach?
I taught business law and also probate matters in business law. Business law is a class that probably ought to be taught to all students.
Did the Vietnam War or its after effects have any impact on the students at Volunteer State while you were the dean of students?
I don't recall any adverse impact or positive impact.
And during that time, you were going to school, you had 2 small children, wife at home and working. Did you find that was pretty typical of your classmates?
Yes, I found that that was somewhat typical. There were persons who were married and the husband or wife was going to law school, and they had children. So,
which classes at the law school gave you the most trouble?
That's probably a good question. I'm trying to. I'd have to think about that because we had good teachers.
Who was teaching at that time?
And I can't recall.
I know Joe Lackey was the dean.
Yes, Dr. Lackey. Yeah.
Did Doug Fisher teach there at all?
Yes, he did. He taught civil procedure. He did. And he did a good
how
job.
would you describe Doug Fisher as a professor?
I thought he was an excellent professor, excellent teacher, and he certainly knew the subject and he knew its application. I remember one time that he was talking about making an interview. Time was of the essence, and he just wrote out a complaint on a piece of paper, and made it to the courthouse in time to beat the statute of limitations. And so everybody was, you can do that? You can just write it out? Well, how else do you do it? You know, you write it out, and sometimes it's just that maybe you got the forms. But he did that. I think that occurred down in Dixon County. And that would have been, filing that, Charlotte is the county seat of Dixon County, I think. So.
Right. Did you have any run-ins with Dean Lackey?
None.
And how would you describe him?
Low-key, gets the job done, accommodating, if at all possible, accommodation before a no.
How large was your class at the Nashville School?
I'm not sure how many people were in my class.
40 people or 100?
I think it was more than 50, but I don't think there was 100 in there, because we were all a class together.
And who would have been your study mates when you were getting ready to take the bar?
The program offered by, he was from
Don
University.
Payne?
Who?
Don Payne?
Don Payne, that's
the
right.
review course?
Yes, I took that.
And did you have any of your classmates study with you?
No, I didn't.
From law school, who were the ones that you saw most of the time when you went to school that are still practicing?
Yeah, well, John Pellegrin, who is son of Ernest Pellegrin,
Right.
and I, we would alternate driving. And then there was another person who went to law school. He had his PhD before he was 28, and he was teaching at Ball State. And he and I also would swap out driving. His name is John Bell, but he practiced, I guess, a little bit, but not much.
You did complete law school, and then you started practicing.
Yes.
I don't know what your first big case was or who your first clients were, and I'm going to ask you, how long did you practice law before you became a judge?
Well, it was about 2 years.
How would you describe the practice of law that you did during those 2 years?
Well, it was tort. You know, I had arrangement with an attorney who had an office in Gallatin, and he said from time to time he needed help in somebody to go to court, do a motion, and he offered that an office in his firm if in return I would do some of the things that needed to be done.
That was Mr. Charles Beatty?
That was Charles Beatty.
How old a lawyer was he at that time?
You know, I guess he had to be probably in late 20s or early 30s, I think.
So he was a contemporary of yours.
Yes, I think he was a contemporary.
And how long had he been practicing when you joined him?
And I don't remember.
He wasn't exactly a mentor then, but more like a colleague?
More like a colleague.
And you had to figure it out for yourself?
Well, yes, most of the time, but he was a colleague who asked questions.
Before we go on to the end of your practicing law and entering the judiciary, we're going to take a break.
Okay, that's fine.
Chancellor Gray, let me ask you about two people we haven't spent much time on before we go into your judicial career, and that is Ed and Bobby Joe. Who are those two individuals?
Well, Ed is my brother. He's the fourth child, and Bobby Joe is the fifth child, and so he's our youngest brother.
And did you have any spats with either of these?
Well,
brothers?
yes, we did. More so with Bob than Ed.
The baby?
Right. Sometimes there were times when he wanted, maybe we were going to do something and go off with a friend, and he wanted to go along, and he didn't get invited, and he'd get mad about that.
Your mother had babies almost each year there for a while.
Yes.
Because you're like stepping stones. You're 42, brother 43, a brother 44. As far as dates of birth, would you say that you were all pretty close?
Yes, yes, we are.
You still close?
Yes, we are.
And what are your brothers doing now?
Well, Ed is retired. He was in the field of education and started his teaching at Forest High School in Marshall County, and then taught in Bedford County, and then was elected by the Board of Education of Bedford County to the director of schools.
How long did he do that?
Probably 15 years, 10 years, something like that, maybe a little bit more.
And today he's doing?
He is retired.
In Bedford County?
In Bedford
So
County.
he's back where you all grew up.
Yes, that's right.
Now, Bobby Joe, who probably gave you the hardest time, where's Bobby Joe? And what's he doing?
He is in San Antonio, Texas. He always said he was going to move. What he did, move to Texas. What he did high school-wise, he graduated from high school and then joined the Air Force. And he was stationed near San Antonio. I forgot the name of the field, but then he went into a business. He saw a need. With people who were opening up businesses, especially persons coming in from Mexico or any place, and they needed to know about state taxes and monies and banking. So he found a niche that needed someone, and he became an accountant. And not a certified public accountant, but a bookkeeper is probably the right word, and it just fits the niche. So they offer, but especially the taxation persons who opened businesses that called on him didn't want to get caught up in not paying taxes.
Before I move on, let me ask just one or two more questions about your family. Sean, he's your oldest?
It's my son, yes.
And where is he and what is he doing?
Sean lives in North Carolina, and he works for Lowe's. He lives in Denver, North Carolina, and about 17 miles away is Mooresville, North Carolina, and that's where a big administration building is for Lowe's. I think he told me once they have about 5,000 employees out of that place.
And is he married?
He's married, no children.
And Shannon, your daughter?
Shannon is divorced. She has 2 children, Trey and Avery. Trey is the nickname. It's James Michael Savota the second, and she teaches school. She's a kindergarten teacher.
Where?
At Howard Elementary School in Gallatin.
So your grandchildren are close to you?
They are, and it's wonderful that they are close.
And those 2 little ones, what are their names?
James Michael Savota second, known as Trey.
And how old is he?
He's 12 years old. And Avery is, she 9 years old? Yes, she's 9 years old.
All right. Now, I know, I just want to finish a few of these personal questions. I know that you had a long marriage and a great loss. I don't remember when Christy died.
I can't recall the date right now.
But getting through those difficult times, I know I saw you at the judicial conference, how hard it was on you, and 10 years ago this month, you remarried, is that right?
That's right.
And Janice is a high school friend?
I knew her in high school, at Central High School in Shelbyville.
And what was her name when you were in high school?
Sandlin, Janice Sandlin.
Did she live near you all?
She did not. She lived in Wheel, which is a community in Bedford County. And I tease her sometimes because some other people started it. I think that she was a real spoke in Wheel. I forgot how they said that, but.
And you both went to Martin College.
Yes, Christy knew Janice because Janice had dated Christy's cousin. That was Lynn Greer.
That's a name that people in Nashville know, Lynn Greer. He's a very prominent Republican.
So, I think Christy and Janice, I think they were, when they were in college, they came to Nashville and had I guess you would call it a sleepover, but she was there. And so she knew, and then she knew, Janice knew Lynn and Christy, but then our relationship was just being at the same high school and also being at Martin College, because Janice was a year ahead of me at Martin. And Ed, my brother, also was in the class after me. So Ed, my brother, went to Martin College. Yeah.
Very good. Now, turning to your start in the legal profession that you worked so hard to get to, 1980 you graduated from the Nashville School of Law, or the Y Law School.
Yes.
You practiced for 2 years. What was the most challenging experience you had during those 2 years?
Well, that's a hard question, I think. The most challenging experience. It was, I think, having to do with land, and I had to really study hard to find some answers to that particular case. It wasn't like to quiet title, but could have been called that. Maybe that's what it should have been, instead of searching out the owners. And then I had another case that was a contingency case, and it was the money earned on that case that I spent to run for a judge.
What led you to run for judge?
Well, the Sumner County Commission had created and asked the General Assembly to create another General Sessions Court. The workload was very heavy on General Sessions Division 1. So the General Assembly, at the county's request, created a General Sessions Division 2, which was to be known as the well, it was,
Domestic?
well, it had probate, and the county was, the state trial courts circuit and chancery were behind in divorce cases, so that it was to be the domestic relations case, or the family court for Sumner County. That's what it was to be called, but we just called it General Sessions 2. And so I had probate, juvenile, and divorces. And we were working on getting those divorces over and at final disposition. And then dealing with the juveniles was just, most of the time, it was just finding the best resource to aid the juveniles, although we did have a lot of dependent neglected cases. And we also had, it was a couple of years before '82 that the feds got into the matter of the child support and paternity of children who were non-marital children. So that began and continues.
How did you run for office in '82?
Well, I think one of the things that people kind of remembered most, and what happened was that I was running and I was going to all of the places that would have something. For example, if there was a ham breakfast, I was going to the ham breakfast. And of course, my opponents were also doing the same thing.
How many were there?
2. And I would get up early in the morning and no place to go. Because I'd already been to this coffee club or this breakfast club, and you know, they're very nice, but you don't need to wear them out and keep going back. You got to do something else. So I found that, and Bill Hillard, who had worked with me at Volunteer State Community College, suggested, well, you need to let people see you. He said, best thing to do would just be to stand out in the middle of the street. And I said, well, you know, that's an idea. He's why I'm teasing. I said, that's a good idea. We'll just stand out early in the morning. If people see you out at 5 o'clock, will they figure you want the job and that you're going to work? So I began to get out there at about 5 o'clock in the morning and just rotate around. I would stop at 31E in Gallatin is main spot, and I had a place there that was pretty safe, and so I'd have a sign up, vote for Tom Gray. And then in Hendersonville, there were about 3 different spots, and also then I would go out in the where they would let me, like stand in the outside of Kroger, or outside of, we didn't have a Publix, I think it was then, but H.G. Hill.
Who helped you in your campaign?
Well, Bill Hillard was one. Wade Powers was another. These were both persons that I had worked with at Volunteer State. Wade had been a county commissioner, and he was dean of admissions at the college. And then he was academic. He was dean of admissions at one time. Then he became the academic dean, and then later on he served as president of a community college up in East Tennessee.
Did you enjoy campaigning?
I did. I did enjoy it. You know, people expect things, and I learned one thing that people want is they want you to ask them for their vote. And so, and every once in a while you might do that, and they say, well, why should I vote for you? And I said, well, I'm going to ask you, but I'll answer any questions you have. And they were usually talkative. They had a little power, you know, why should I vote for you?
And what would you tell them?
I would tell them that I was a hard worker, and that I would do the best job I could, that I can't promise you anything because judges can't promise. And I said, so, you know, if you vote for me, it doesn't mean that you win a case, or and it doesn't mean you lose a case. It just means that I don't consider that.
Did you have to raise very much money to run?
No, I didn't. I didn't accept any contributions except one. I accepted one contribution. The money that I had gotten on that contingency case, and it was not a lot of money, it was about $7,200. That's the money that I ran on. And I sent back, Ed sent me some money, and my brother Ed, and then there was one person, it was an elderly gentleman in the Rotary Club, and I was a member of the Rotary Club. And he was on the city council, and this was before I was running for judge, and I had supported him on the city council and encouraged him to run because he was, I want to say, extremely gifted in mathematical computations and figuring budgets and things, and he was just a valuable asset. And in Rotary Club, he handed me a check for $100, and I tried to give it back to him, and he wouldn't take it. And then I thought, okay, what? I don't want to make him feel bad, and he said, "You disappoint me if you don't take the money. Just go ahead. You know, I don't have any strings on it." So I did put that money on the campaign, but any other monies I got, I didn't use.
And what was the election result? I know you won, but how much? And
it was out of the votes. It was a pretty high number to win by. The voting was. It was, I forgot how many people voted that year, but my two opponents, I guess it was at least 3-1.
That's pretty substantial.
Mm-hmm.
Now, having won the family court division, what did you find you needed to know when you got there?
One, I needed to know resources that were available to children and what the resources were. I also needed to know what the practice of the Tennessee, at that time it would have been the Tennessee Department of Human Services. It's now the Tennessee Department of Children Services. I needed to know what and how they worked and what they would do, and also to understand and have a look at foster care.
What type of training did you get to handle the domestic relations and the probate and the juvenile matters?
The training was just the CLEs that people or somebody would put on, and I would go to those.
Had you handled many divorces before you were a judge?
No, I think I handled one.
Had you handled any custodies before you became a judge?
Yes, I'd handled some custody cases. They were pretty easy. I don't think they were too much argument in the way.
Had you ever represented a juvenile when you became a judge?
No, I had not ever I'd never been appointed to juvenile.
Did you have to run on a political party?
No, at that time, the county offices all ran nonpartisan, and so judges would run nonpartisan.
What was the jurisdiction that you were running in for general sessions?
The jurisdiction was the county of Sumner.
Did that change when you moved up?
No, what the General Assembly had done back in after '82, the General Assembly had taken a look and had they made some judicial districts, altered some judicial districts, and that was to go into effect in many of them in '82, but the new judgeship, Chancery Court, would come into being in '86 by previous action of the General Assembly. And Sumner County, prior to that, the judicial district included Robertson, Montgomery, and Sumner. The Montgomery was for civil, I think, only. They had a criminal court, so but then all Chancery Court became out of Montgomery and Robertson County. So they went into another judicial district, which I think they still have, and Mush Turner, who was the chancellor in Gallatin, took over. They made some changes in the judicial district involving Macon, Trousdale, Smith, and Jackson County.
When you were serving on the General Sessions bench, you knew in '86 that there was going to be a new position?
Yes.
An open position. You spent so much of your earlier years working to become a lawyer. You became a lawyer for 2 years and then you became a judge. And there's a difference between being a lawyer and being a judge. What drew you to being a judge after you'd only been practicing for 2 years?
Well, I think it probably just goes back to childhood and how respected the courts were, and it just came along that I think I aspired to be a judge, and I had worked with juveniles for years in school and even with people at the colleges. So felt like that. I felt like I could be a good judge in juvenile, and I felt like I could learn the divorce matters. Although I still am not so. I wonder how people can treat the children when surely they ought to know it's not in the best interest of the children to call the other parent bad names and say bad things about them.
It had to be a big change because the youth, the juveniles that you were dealing before, were in a positive environment. They're going to college, maybe they cut classes or something. That, you know, the bad things that they did couldn't compare in any way to the juvenile delinquents. And then you also had young people in college whose parents cared about them. They're there to go to school, but the delinquents and the dependents, people who would have abandoned their children. That must have been a big change for you as far as dealing with children.
Well, it was. I took office September 1st, 1986, elected in the August election. About 14 days after.
That was chancellor, right?
I'm sorry.
That was a chancellor in '86?
Yes, elected
Okay.
chancellor in '86. About 14 days after September 14th, but it might not have been. It might have been the 13th, whatever. The Department of Children's Services filed. They'd had an aunt where this child, who was about 12 years old, the father had told him to help unload the truck. He had a lot of old lumber pieces that he'd picked up primarily for fire, heating his house. And the child wasn't working as fast as he thought, and he hit him in the he hit him in the back of the head with a 2x4, and injured the child. And then the child ran away from home that night, and then he was found, and it's an emergency hearing, everything, and dealing with that. But we got him placed with the in foster care with the Department of Human Services, and he was in foster care until he was 18. And the mother and father had other children, and one of the children, the oldest one, had run away from home when he was 15.
You had, I think, as a chancellor, a number of cases where the children have been hurt or injured. How has that changed as far as your perception of whether it's happening more or less, whether the parents are doing a better job or doing a poorer job over the 30 years you've been a chancellor or so?
I don't see a lot of change. We're having more non-marital children, and so you're dealing with determination of parentage, child support, parenting time. And it seems like it's heavier, but I'm not sure that it's any heavier than it was in 1982.
Do you find parental termination occurring more?
No, it isn't occurring more. Well, it isn't occurring more. Prior to, not sure which year, but now, if there's a termination of parental rights, if the parents whose rights are being taken away or proposed taken away, he can get service of an attorney on affidavit of indigency.
During the time that you have been on the bench as chancellor, domestic relations law has changed a lot.
That's right.
What do you think are some of the biggest changes, and do you consider them positive or helpful?
I think for the most part, the ones I think about are positive. One of those is the child support issue, in which you have worksheets for determination of how much child support should be paid. Now, that came into effect in October 13th, or 1989 or not. I'm sorry, that's not clear. What is clear is that the first child support guidelines came out, it was a percentage. So like if it's one child, it was 21%, 2 children, 32%, 3 children, 42 maybe, and then after that it was 50% of income. Now it's done probably better now, child support and having
Weighted on the
worksheets.
income.
It's just based on income, and everything is based off what pro rata share. So if the father's to pay 65% of, or it'd be 65%, and the mother is 35.
Of their combined incomes.
Mm-hmm. Combined income to get that that figure.
How has the parenting plan impacted custody cases?
The parenting plan is a good guide for persons to go by. You find sometimes that parents are trying to figure out, or one of them may be trying to manipulate circumstances where it's not possible. For example, putting down mother 183, father 182 days, and yes, the father, how do you manage to get you in your 182 days? And they don't have any idea how they plan to do that. So we have to say, do it again.
The law on alimony, how has that changed, and what are your views on awarding alimony?
Well, first thing I do is I take a look at the factors that are codified as to, one, as to whether or not there should be any alimony, and if the answer is yes, then what type of alimony? Is it rehabilitative? Is it in solito? Is it in futuro?
What kinds of alimony existed when you first went on the bench?
Just the term alimony, support. They didn't define everything. So, for example, I remember having a case in which there was a need by the wife for monies to find a place to live. She didn't have any money, and that we just call that transitional alimony. It may be just set her up in an apartment. She's going to go to work, but she hadn't gone to work yet, and so there are cases of transitional and then rehabilitative alimony. Generally stays in control of the court. Well, all the alimony except alimony in solito stays in the.
Do you find that you award alimony in futuro very much?
The answer is probably yes. That when the marriage has been a marriage of long duration and the factors fit and ability to pay and need, then I award that alimony.
You have been active in the Tennessee Judicial Conference. You served as treasurer when Judge
Steve
Daniels was the president.
Yes.
And I know that you've attended a lot of the conferences. There are several issues affecting the judiciary that have come up in the last few years. One was the judicial redistricting bill. I don't think it affected your...
It did not, or they said it would not affect Sumner County. That's what we were told.
With regards to judges who are on the appellate courts, though, we are looking at a proposed constitutional amendment to revise the Constitution so that the members on the appellate courts maintain their positions on a yes-no vote as opposed to having an opponent. Do you think that that amendment is a good thing and should pass or not?
You're talking about amending the Constitution of the state of Tennessee that
Yes.
that makes it specific that the
Modified
Have to get a
Missouri
vote.
plan.
yeah,
Is what
it's the
it's-
modified Missouri plan where they just you either
Run on
say
their-
yes or no, should be reelected or no. My personal opinion is that I don't think what we presently do meets the constitutional requirement of what was intended in the Constitution. But and also at the same time, it's projected that you might have to raise $200,000 or $300,000 or more to retain your position in some states. That's even in, I think in Texas, because that's been cited some, it's even the trial judge runs, and it gets expensive to running. Of course, trial judges run now,
Correct.
and
But I think at the appellate level, in Texas and Ohio and states where their Supreme Court judges are elected with opposition, the campaigns have run into the $12–15 million for those judges to get elected. But at the present time, you think the wording of the Constitution isn't being followed under the modified Missouri plan?
I don't think, yes, that's what I'm saying. I think the amendment should be made to it.
You think it should pass?
I think it should
Hopefully.
pass. Yes.
Why do you think that?
That it should pass?
Yes, why would you be in support of passing that amendment?
Well, we're talking about an amendment of just passing it yes or no,
Correct.
not contested.
If the amendment passes in November of 2014, the Constitution will allow appellate judges to run on their record and get a vote, yes, retain this person, or no, reject that person. That would be the system that would remain in place if the amendment passes. And I understood you to say that you favor that.
I favor the clarification in the amendment, is what I do. And I think the reason for that is in thinking about a vote when I was in elementary school and high school, but primarily I think in elementary, it impressed me that said some of these communist countries have elections. They have elections, but, and as someone said, and a teacher that said, yes, they have elections, and you can either say yes or no to the candidate, but it's already preordained that that would be, and primarily they were talking about persons getting elected, I think.
Be preordained as far as the
But-
outcome?
I'm sorry.
The outcome would be preordained?
Yes, it could be preordained in that kind of situation. Here, I think probably it's in the best interest, you asked me my personal opinion, best interest of Tennessee not to have the contested races that are going to cause large amounts of money.
Do you feel that there are problems in society that cause the courts to have a lot of difficulty deciding the issues, such as same-sex parents?
I haven't really given a lot of thought, I think, to the matters of homosexuality or same-sex parents. I have not made any discrimination on that because except perhaps in a case it wasn't discrimination. There was a complaint filed, and it's been a couple of years ago, for two persons to be named as the parent of the child, although one parent had a sperm donor and had the child. So she was, by law, the biological mother and the legal mother, she was. And they wanted to have the court make the other party the mother also, with legal and biological. And I don't know how you could do that. I know it could be fashioned in some way, but
have you had to decide a custody issue where both parents were of the same sex?
I don't think I've had one of those.
As you have been on the bench now these many years, do you find that you have maintained your relationships with those lawyers you knew before you went on the bench?
Well, a lot of those persons who were on the bench have died or retired.
Oh.
And so there are probably a few left, but well, I was running just, let's say, the '86 election. I didn't have any opponent. Certainly some of those lawyers are around, but we've got a lot of new lawyers coming in what I find is a lot of the new lawyers are going into the criminal court and seeking appointment. And if you look at the monies paid out, it's not unusual to see $50,000 or even $100,000 paid out. And some lawyers find that now that they can have their office at home, and then if they take the legal designation or for a person who's indigent, they can talk to them at the courthouse, and they often meet at the courthouse, and then they are able to draw that. When I started, we had to look around to try to find somebody, and it was most of the time pro bono, although a couple of years after that, there were some payments. The state had a little bit of money to make the payments.
How big is the Sumner County Bar?
I don't know a specific number in the Sumner County Bar, but I think we have had 72. I'm not sure. I said I didn't know a specific number, but that's...
But a small number actually in the county. So you must have lawyers that come from out of county to practice before you?
Yes.
And
yes.
of those, do you notice any difference in their practice with those that reside in Sumner County?
I haven't noticed difference in their practice.
I know that you have been friends with many judges since you went on the bench and been active, as I said, in the judicial conference. What can you tell me about some of your colleagues, like Judge Pellegrin or Judge Goodall, Tom Goodall?
Yeah. Well, Judge Ernest Pellegrin was appointed by Winfield Dunn to a post as criminal judge in Sumner County, and he was very good at that work, and I think it was Governor Alexander that made him the Commissioner of Corrections. And then after that, and I got to know Judge Pellegrin quite well, and then with his illness, and he was a good person, and he didn't violate any of the rules. I guess what I'm thinking about is one occasion where someone had made some kind of offer, and he felt like it would breach of ethics, so he got out of the case. Thomas Goodall was a Southern gentleman who, as he said, never let the facts get in the way of a good story. And Judge Goodall and I would probably almost every day we had conversation either in his office or in my office, and he liked being a judge, and he was in control of his docket, and he worked hard, and I was surprised by his death. I had just been on the phone the day before talking to him. He was in the hospital talking to him, and then the next day, Laura Goodall, his niece, called me from the hospital to tell me that Ernest had, not Ernest, but that Thomas had passed away. And
your present colleagues are D.
Gay, who was was assistant district attorney for about 30 years, and he's the criminal court judge. And then C.L. Rogers, who practiced law with Thomas Goodall, is circuit court judge.
And I take it you have good relations with all of your colleagues.
We do have good relations.
You are a chancellor that has a reputation for being a very hard worker, even on Saturdays, that you get your opinions out timely. What advice would you have to a new chancellor who might take your place since you're stepping down next year?
I'm not sure I could just give any. I'm trying to figure out how to say what the question asked is. The
advice
that I would give to someone
a new
coming
chancellor
in.
taking your seat.
Right.
You know what the docket is like.
I do know what the docket is like, and I know that I have an 8 o'clock docket, a 9 o'clock docket, and a 1 o'clock docket. And if they need all day, then we go nine, start at 9 and stop whenever it ends. Probably I would tell him that I'm not sure that it's all that good to have that 1 o'clock docket unless you plan to spend some time there.
You have spent some time in the court late into the night.
Yes, we did. That was several years ago, and I regret to some extent what I did relative to, it was a divorce case, and it started at 1 o'clock, and we were still going at 8 o'clock, and one witness went home. He lived in Robertson County, and Nathan Harsh had said he had to get him testimony, so Nathan had called his home late at night telling him to come back to court. And the court reporter tells the story about staying late, and I regret that I did that to those people. But then I was saying we get these cases over with, get a final disposition.
I know that you have been good in getting your cases concluded in a timely way. You've announced that you're not running. What are you going to be doing after you step off the bench? Well,
after I do that, one, I hope to spend a little bit more time with the grandchildren, and I also plan on doing some writing. Not some of the writing that I want to do is just for family, because I think that families draw closer if they know some things and have some things. And I'm going to ask my brothers and my sister to write down and do it over a period of time. Write down early recollections, things that they remember early on as child. And then also I'm going to look a little bit at genealogy, because my children, great-grandfather grew up in Portland, and he was a Link, UN Link, and he left home when he was a little over 18. He went to Nashville. He got a job on the trolley, driving the trolley, and he had that job when it changed over to buses. It still was a trolley to him, or electric, and and I think the children should know some of those things.
That's very interesting. I want to thank you for these comments, and I think we'll take a break now.